A city of two tales. The Bigfoot and Beaver story. This is a short story, but I thought interesting. It has a Superman angle to it, or at least that is what I imagined when I heard the story. It was 2002 in the lower part of Canada when their version of a park ranger happened to see from a distance what looked like Sasquatch walking across an area where beavers had built a dam. This is his story. This was in the summertime, which you will probably think obviously when you hear the rest of the story, but that is okay. It should be obvious. So Sas got all the way across this beaver dam, but at the very end it started to break up with his weight on it. He danced around on it as it started to move under his feet. I was reminded of the way the old lumberjacks would be seen when they had contests, and there would be two lumberjacks on one log in the water, and they would try to turn the log with their feet and cause the other one to lose balance and fall into the water. That was a lot what the Bigfoot looked like when the dam started to break up. To my shock and surprise, he jumped down into the water and caught the end of the dam and forced it back into place. He stayed there in the water and worked on the end of the dam doing something. I suspect he was getting some roots or tree limbs back intertwined with each other. Next he quickly jumped up, leaping out of the water. He sorta jogged over to the nearest tree, which was about a medium-sized tree. Maybe 12 to 15 foot tall. Understand, I am estimating all this while looking down from a ridge above the valley, so my figures could be off. Anyways, he pulls the tree out of the ground, roots and all, and proceeds to go back over and shove it into place along that end of the beaver dam. I figure so it would hold the dam long enough for the beaver to spot the problem and fix it proper. It was the craziest thing to watch because it totally reminded me of like when a kid is playing on the couch when his mother told him not to, and he is fooling around up there and suddenly he knocks all the pillows off. The kid sees what he has done and immediately jumps off the couch and races to pick up all the fallen pillows and replace them before mother sees what he had done. The reaction of the Bigfoot to the corner of the dam falling apart totally reminded me of that scenario. After shoving the tree into place so that it was laying horizontally with the root end shoring up the end of the dam, he had collapsed, and then the trunk going out along the rest of the dam helping to shore it up. He fiddled with the tree for a few minutes until he obviously thought he had it just where it needed to be. Then he let go and stood back to admire his work. Apparently he felt the job was not finished as he again jumped up out of the water, which is in itself a sight to see. They are so powerful and graceful, and this time his stride over to get a tree was much less hurried. He took his time choosing the right tree and then yanked on it and then gave it another yank, and on his third attempt the tree came free of the ground with the roots still dripping dirt off them. He did that again with another tree and then hauled the two trees over to the dam and threw them down and then jumped into the water. He spent some time ripping a few limbs off of each tree, though I was way too far away to see the logic in his actions, but I bet that it exists. Then he did some more work with the trees and the limbs, and finally he stood back and looked at his work and seemed satisfied with the outcome. Mind you, I'm certain it was just a patch job. The beaver will see the damage and come along and start working on it, probably tonight. Still, it is interesting the Bigfoot reacted with such concern. Do you suppose they are aware how important the beaver is, being a keystone species and all? The Sasquatch is certainly an interesting species. He never saw me up on that ridge watching. He was too involved with first fixing the dam, and then he was too proud of his work to be looking up at me. If I had a pair of binoculars, I bet I would have seen a smug look on his face when he finished. He didn't go as far as to cross his arms and nod his head, but I really thought he might at some point. Once again he leapt out of the water, which was really an awesome sight because of the power it takes to move such a huge body that distance. Then when he lands, the water cascades off his hair, and you know he's probably jumping with an extra 75, maybe 100 pounds at the start of the jump. I mean, what do 4-5 gallon cans weigh when full? I bet that much water ran off him easily. I have to admit I was a little disappointed he didn't shed the water the way a dog would. I wanted to see that huge creature shaking its booty. In the end it was still quite a show. I'm glad I got to watch it. I wish I had a camera with me with that kind of range. Any pics I would have taken would have just ended up more fuel for the blurry picture fire that people are quick, though admittedly not being unfair when they make fun of the fact nobody can get a decent picture of Bigfoot. Though there have been some interesting videos posted, but how can you trust anything these days? Eventually Bigfoot moved on and I watched him work his way through the forest until I couldn't see him any longer. They are fascinating creatures which should be left alone. There are Native American tribes who refer to them as the guardians of the forest, which is really fitting if you think about it. This story sort of backs up that theory. I mean, sure, he caused the dam to break, but how strong was it to begin? In any case, he fixed his mistake, which proves he is the guardian. Stay tuned for the next story, please. Here's another short story which I found interesting. It takes place in the year of 1979 in the west part of Texas. Jimmy Speckleton was riding his motocross bike up some very steep trails with his XR75 Honda. It was a four-cycle bike, which meant it had a little more trouble getting up the steep trails than did some of the other similar size bikes, which were two-stroke bikes. Nevertheless, it was a pretty sound bike for its size. Jimmy was able to get all out of it that was possible, which is why he was able to be out there trying to ride up the same hills that two-stroke bikes were tackling. On the late afternoon he had his experience. He was the last one out there, just basically messing around. He had an hour drive waiting for him and it was rush hour, so better to kill the time out there on the bike than to spend it sitting in traffic. His mother was picking him up in the family pickup truck. There was nothing he would enjoy less than being stuck in traffic with his mother and her questions. The time was much better spent out here. When the rush hour traffic had settled down, he would ride his bike up to where his mom would have the truck parked. They would load it and go home from there. She didn't mind letting him go riding since she worked not too far away. Plus, he wasn't going up the very toughest trails since his bike was too small and, of course, hampered by the four-stroke's lack of power. So his mother had less to worry about than some of the other mothers who had sons with two-stroke bikes. Still, he was satisfied going up the lesser trails. He would rev up the engine and take that baby as far as he could go, and then he'd either make it to the crest or sometimes he would not make it and have to turn the bike back down facing the other direction, and then he could ride back down and do it all again. It was dusty. Rough going. During the hotter part of the days it could get right uncomfortable with the heat and the humidity. And he came almost every day. His grandfather bought him his bike a year back and he had hardly went a day not riding it. He always was up for one more ride. One more time, feeling the wind in his hair and the ground whipping by under his feet. So that was what he was doing when he noticed out of the corner of his eye a large, brown or reddish-brown, creature standing on two legs, and it was covered from head to toe with that hair. Both of them were at the bottom of the hillside and about 2 football fields away from where it turned to go up. Jimmy looked over and cranked the throttle up and down. To his amazement, the creature nodded its huge head up and down a couple of times. Next it got into a position which any fool could have looked at and deducted it was prepared to race. Jimmy again hit the throttle, making the bike roar to life and then fall away, and then he would bring it back up in revs, making tons of noise and perhaps writing checks his ass couldn't cash. He looked around to see if there was anybody who might see this happening, because if what he thought was going to happen did happen, he was going to need a witness to back up his story. Jimmy looked but did not spot anybody who might be in a position to see what was about to take place. He glanced over at the beast again. Clearly it was becoming restless. If he wanted to do this race, he was going to have to do it now. He glanced at the sun, which was barely showing over the mountains. It would be dark in a short while. Or rather, the shadows from the mountain would make it too dark to ride. That was one drawback about the XR75. It didn't have any lights on it. Which was fine. Just something to break off when you get to serious riding. It did mean, however, that if you were going to make one last ride, the time was quickly evaporating. Jimmy made one last quick glance around, being extra careful to check from his 5 o'clock to his 7 o'clock. That was military talk, which meant he checked all the way around except for what was directly behind him. No luck. Can you believe it? He was going to race Bigfoot up a trail and nobody was going to see it happen. Well, crap on it then. Jimmy pulled back on the throttle and put his bike into first gear. He let out the clutch and went racing toward toe steep trail going up the hill. Jimmy glanced over at his opponent and saw the beast was keeping up and looked like it was not slowing down. He quickly edged the bike into second gear and pulled back on the throttle. Across from him he could see the beast was keeping pace. In fact, it was starting to get a little ahead of him. Jimmy turned his attention back to his bike and the trail in front of him and squeezed the clutch shut, allowing the bike to shift up into third gear. Then he yanked back on the throttle and pulled a little ahead of the Bigfoot. Amazingly, the Bigfoot was kicking up dust and keeping up with the Honda XR75, so they were roughly even when they came to the bottom of the hill. Jimmy took his bike up the hill as far as possible in the third gear and then was forced to downshift into second. He glanced over and could see the Bigfoot was starting to pull ahead of him going up the trail hill. The beast was using both hands and feet to climb the steep hillside. As it went, it was throwing out puffs of dust every time it grabbed another handful of the hill. Jimmy, on the other hand, was quickly forced to downshift into first gear. At least now he was in the gear that would get him to the top. Then he gave another glance over toward his opponent and was shocked to see the beast was about 3/4 the way up to the top. Jimmy was still at around the halfway mark. It became apparent he had no chance to win the race. Instead of giving chase, he just shut down the bike and watched in awe at this animal's ability to climb the hills so fast. Jimmy watched the Bigfoot go over the crest of the hill and disappear. Then he turned his attention toward his mother's truck and was able to see her waving at him. He was excited. There was a chance she saw the Bigfoot as they raced each other up the trail. When he came sliding into a stop, he was full of excitement, asking his mother if she had seen what he was racing up the hill. She gave a disappointing no. She had only seen him stopped halfway up the trail hill. Apparently she had come onto the scene shortly after he gave up the face, and therefore his mother had not been watching the area above him. As it turned out, the whole thing ended up being a real bust for Jimmy because both his parents decided that whether he had actually seen Bigfoot or not, the fact that he claimed to have not only seen him, but raced him up the trail hill, was enough reason to keep the motorcycle at home for a while. That put Jimmy at an awkward place because on the one hand, if he admitted to lying about seeing Bigfoot, then he was going against everything he was about. He wouldn't make such a fantastic claim unless it was true. That's why he was looking for someone to have seen them. To be proof so he could tell people. Otherwise he wasn't going to tell anybody. They'd laugh him out of town. But then when he was sure his mother had seen, because she saw him, for crying out loud. Of course, she didn't see the Bigfoot. However, that doesn't mean she doesn't believe him when it comes to letting him bring his bike up to the trail hills. No, in that case she believes him and suddenly feels the place is no longer safe for him to be playing or riding his motorcycle. That was the end of this story, as Jimmy never was able to return to the trail hills, that is, in a timely fashion, to have maybe seen Bigfoot again. He did get to go back there when he was older, but for that summer it was a bust. He even tried to talk his mother into letting him just go up there and hang out, walk around. What he was hoping to do was to see the big hairy creature again. Why not? It seemed like a fun enough character. It liked to race. When it won, it didn't hang around to gloat. He jokes about it, but he really feels like his mother caused him to miss out on possibly a relationship with the creature. Who knows? Maybe it would have, or did, come around again looking to play or race.